Hello and welcome to Journeys and Journals. The journey is far, far back today. And fortunately, we've got the lady that could have written the journal. And I wanted to welcome Myrna to the show. Myrna, your last name is?
Morrison.
And is there a name, a grandma's name before that? Is that a family tradition?
My grandmother and my great-grandmother.
Well, let's hear them both.
Well, the great-grandmother went by the name of Elizabeth.
Okay.
What her other name was, I do not know, other than her last name was Brown. My grandmother was Aurelia Minerva. Minerva Aurelia.
Beautiful names we don't hear very often. Where was home for your family? Where did they first originate?
My grandmother's family in North Dakota.
Oh, up where it's really cold.
Yes.
How much about family history have you researched, or are you interested in your family?
I just know the story that my grandmother told me, but it's not a lot.
Okay, like a kid sitting at the
Yes.
fire. I'm going to hear that story right now. Could you tell me about?
She was born in the Dakota Territory in 1873. And she was born at Fort Abercrombie, North Dakota, what is now North Dakota. And then as a baby, her mother took her down to Fort Sisseton, which is now in northern South Dakota.
Oh.
So she lived at Fort Sisseton for until she was 8.
Now, why would Mom live at the fort?
Because the Indian village was just right across the road, and she worked as a washerwoman there at the fort. She worked for Captain Van Horn.
Oh, so you have quite a bit of history about your family. Now, your grandmother had just the one girl?
No, my great-grandmother just had the one child.
And she came to the fort with your mom.
Grandmother.
With your grandmother. How do you know this story?
My grandmother told me the story.
What was that?
How during the weekdays they lived at the fort, and on weekends they lived in the village across the road.
And was there a grandpa in this picture by that time?
No. My great-grandmother did marry a man, but it didn't last long. And I know that he is buried at Fort Sisseton.
So tell me about I mean, she's raising this child, but at the same time working to keep
Well,
things.
a lot of the Indian women did the washing for the officers at the forts.
So where did you learn this story?
My grandmother told it to me.
But you're one of the few to know this story.
I'm the only one that she told the story to.
Why?
She did not tell her children or any of the other grandchildren except me, and I just have decided that I was the special one.
and why? I mean, she told you a long time ago.
Oh, yes.
Why is it right now that you're willing to share it with our TV audience, with me?
Well, I think that Native culture is very important. Even today it's important.
Absolutely, but why'd you wait so long?
Well, I waited until she told me not to tell anyone until all her children were gone, and after my mother was one of my aunts was the last to pass, and so I kept the story to myself until then.
Oh, secrets.
So then I wrote it down and gave it to one of my cousins who was quite interested. So
I am so glad you're recording. And today you're recording it on TV so we can share it with the audience here in Southern Oregon. What brought you to Southern Oregon?
Got married.
Okay.
Because I was born in Northern California. I was born in Mount Shasta. And my mother and I did a lot of traveling around. And we eventually wound up in Seattle, where I met my husband, and later got married and moved here.
But so you have Native American blood in you, and your husband, hey, he too had.
He had a small amount, yes.
And yet, I mean, if I met you on the street, I might say, did you, were you born in northern Italy? I mean, you know, that it's the same skin color, the same thing. What do people ask? Was it Grandma they asked about where she?
My great-grandmother?
Yeah.
She did not tell her daughter the full truth about her heritage until she got much older. And she tried to carry the story on about my grandmother being Spanish and French.
Oh, that makes sense. I was trying.
And so when it became at the time when it became not nice to be Indian, she took the little girl and moved to Bismarck and put her in a Catholic school there.
And did she tell her her real name, or?
Was still Minerva, or Aurelia Minerva, actually. Had it backwards.
But who did she say she was?
Well, she told her last name was Lafar.
And that she was not, she was the aunt or the taking care?
She took care of her because the mother was killed in an Indian raid, supposedly.
Oh, so out of cover up, we call it nowadays,
it was.
right? And
Well,
she was doing it out of genuine kindness.
Of course, she had to take care of this little girl, which she did.
By saying that she was not her very own flesh and blood.
No.
I want to cry.
I know.
I want to cry and say, Mom, you have paid.
I never knew my great-grandmother, but one of my cousins knew her. And throughout the family, we've always called the great-grandmother Grandma Fashion.
Fashion?
Because she was old-fashioned. And then as my grandmother got older, we called her old-fashioned too. Now, guess what? I'm old-fashioned.
Oh, yes? Yes. And you're a grandma?
Oh, yes.
So you can be Grandma Fashion.
Right.
Let's talk about Grandma Fashion. Now, this was long before that.
That was taken in 1946. That was our wedding picture.
Grandma Fashion doesn't look...
Well, that's my husband and I.
Right. But you said this is how many years ago? You were married.
I was married in 46.
But they never called him Grandpa Fashion.
Oh, no.
What was his name?
Well, his real name was Aaron. And he had a nickname that followed him all his life. It was Buzz.
And people around here will remember Buzzy.
Buzzy Morrison.
Now, what brought Buzzy to Southern Oregon?
He was born in Williams.
In 19 and what?
1924.
That's a long time ago. What about his family? Were they from out in Williams?
His mother's family, the Warners, were in Williamsburg.
Oh.
His great-grandfather, Nelson Warner, was born in Williamsburg. And his grandmother, grandmother Warner, she had been a Wilhoit, and she was born in Williams.
So he can really trace his back to
1850s.
That's...
But that's on his mother's side. The father's side came from originally Pennsylvania, moved to Tillamook, Oregon, and then moved down to Southern Oregon.
Well, I've heard Buzzy's name many a time because I've talked to other people like Peggy.
Oh, yes, Peggy knew him very well.
And Peggy
Carpenter.
Peckham. And Peggy comes from the Kincaid tree.
Right.
Family tree from Williamsburg, right?
Yes, the Kincaids were also in Williamsburg, so it carried down.
Her mother had written a beautiful poem about growing up in Williamsburg.
Really?
And Peggy has some of it memorized, but can't seem to find the original.
Oh.
So if anybody got one from Grandma Peckham, I can't remember her first name, but anyhow, she tells stories about.
I knew her, but
You knew her.
I met her several times.
Understand that she was a plump little lady.
She was.
And she would walk from their summer vacations. They would walk from Williams over the mountain to Oregon Caves. And
a lot
they'd
of people
have,
did.
for just fun. And they'd have a pack horse, and they'd put their food on it because their kids were going. The pack horse might fall down, smash the bread, or sweat on the bread.
Yes.
Have you ever walked that walk?
No, I never have. I've climbed to the top of Grayback and back several times, but I've never taken the trail up Cave Camp to the caves.
And that was very common.
Oh yes, a lot of people did that.
That's how the caves were invented.
Yeah.
Discovered. I used to run. Do you know the story of the Oregon
Yes.
Caves?
Elijah Davidson, yes. I've heard the story.
Give me a 1-minute rundown on this story as you
Well, the story I was told.
when you were a kid.
After I got married and came here.
Okay.
I would guess I was still a kid. They were on a hunting trip, and Elijah was following a bear, and him and his dog went to this cave, and in the cave was the bear.
And I wonder if he ran like crazy or if
I don't know. If been me, yes, I'd have run. I'd have run from a bear. If it'd been a cougar, no, I wouldn't have run from it. But
Oh, you are brave. I had seen your braid, and your hair is beautiful.
Thank you.
And how long did it take to grow the braid?
well, I haven't cut my hair since about 1980. So it's been 30-some
But
years.
when you were a girl, how did you wear your hair?
Just straight down.
Ah, no pigtails, and
I didn't wear pigtails until after I got married.
and then you wore it.
In 2 pigtails because it was thicker.
Now, the fact of both families and lots of people, I gather, in Williams had in Canada they call it First Nation blood. Here they call it Indian blood or
Native American,
Native
yeah.
American. It's hard for me to know just the correct term.
Native American is very acceptable now.
Okay, and was that something that you talked about at school? Was it something that...
No. At school, no. Never talked about it because even up in through the 40s, it wasn't acceptable to be a Native American. You were still a redskin.
Oh, and that term is very derogatory.
It is, yes.
So my husband went to school with one young woman in Grants Pass, and it was known that she was Native. Then there were the Calcos married into
Yes, I know the Calcos.
You do.
Yes.
Precious
Way back.
people. And they married 4 into, well, let me try to think of that family name. People from Hugo out at Three Pines. And it seems that these people had no trouble in society, but Klamath, on the other hand, had a terrible time.
Yes, they did. Yes. Over in Klamath, the natives pretty much had their reservation area. Over here, there are no reservations. And the natives were put on their little reservations, and if you lived on the reservation, you went to school in a town, you were then kind of ostracized being a native.
In Northern California, the story is told that if young women, went shopping, you could buy a dress, but you could not try on a dress.
Hmm.
And I want to go,
Yes.
it makes me feel very sad. The story fits in well with this doll. This came from Klamath, and I wished I had bought 2 dolls, because the first doll was in native regalia, or maybe not regalia, but everyday clothes.
Every day, like this doll here.
Yes, like
This
her.
doll or the other doll. The little
And-
buckskin dresses or
Buckskins and beads.
and cotton. They did, some native tribes did use a cotton type material.
At the story was told to me at this Klamath Falls show that the girls were told they could no longer come to school in buckskin. They had to have the material that
of
was
course.
issued them
That's right.
made into dresses.
That's why you'll see my grandmother picture in the 6- and 8-year-old pictures while she's in white man clothes. She, on weekends or whenever they lived in the village, she wore a buckskin. And when she went to the fort, she went to school at the fort, so she had to wear clothes like other children.
You know this story for true.
Yes, yes. And their teacher at Fort Sisseton was also the Catholic priest. So, of course, each child got a little Bible, and each child got a rosary. And all the true white children got beaded rosaries. All the native children got rosaries made with wooden beads. And I have that rosary.
Oh, so the priest knew that she was,
Oh, yes.
but no other people didn't.
Well, I'm sure other people did. But it wasn't talked about.
It wasn't talked about.
She remembers walking on the parade field, watching General Custer ride by on the parade ground. I've been to that fort, and I've walked the parade ground, and I've gone to the school just to look in and see it. It was very interesting going back to that fort.
What did it feel like?
It was kind of interesting to know that this is where my grandmother ran and played. It was fun.
The picture you have here also is, well, grander dresses than I would certainly, or my mother would have worn. Of course, my mother was born in Chile, and things were kind of primitive there, and missionary parents. But this is a gorgeous dress for a young lady. What do you know about this picture?
Nothing really. I just know that it's my grandmother at the age of 6.
And this one is grandma at the
age of 8.
So they go 1, 2, and then you brought this absolutely spectacular fashion statement.
Yes.
What is that one?
That was in 1916, I believe. I think. She was 33 years older.
And dressed to the
Oh,
to the
yes.
nines,
Oh,
I think they
yes.
called it. Did she always? I mean, when you
I know that at that time she was married, of course. We had several children by then. But I don't know whether that picture was taken in Bismarck or in St. Paul, Minnesota, because I know they did live there for a while after she married.
did they master arts of weaving the?
My grandmother's family did not.
I need to
I
find.
do make pine needle baskets, but I didn't learn it from her.
Do you repair baskets that are damaged?
No.
Oh, I've been hunting. I have a large basket that the bottom was taken out of it, and the sad thing is that it was a play toy, and now that we love it so much, I'd like to have it restored.
I bet.
You have a hobby, or should I say?
I have a lot of hobbies.
Okay, name a few.
Well, I quilt, yes. I do make quilts. I work on quilts every day of the year.
How many quilts would you guess you make in a year?
Oh, probably 150.
What do you do with quilts?
The baby quilts all go to the health department.
Why the health department?
Well, they need quilts for newborn babies who are from families where they can't afford quilts and things. And they also go to drug babies and HIV babies.
Something really nice for a kid born disadvantaged.
And then for a while I made quilts for the CASA program.
And what's the CASA program?
It's the abused children.
Ah, and what difference does a blanket make, a quilt?
Well, I hope that it makes them all feel good about getting something of their own. I know that one little girl took her quilt and wore it when she went to court. Another little girl was going to be leaving Josephine County, going to California to live with her father because her mother was abusive. And all she wanted to know was, before she left, she could have a quilt.
Oh.
But I don't know any of these children, and I don't want to know these children because that's not the purpose of making the quilts.
So you're giving to the community, to the disadvantaged,
Well, kind of.
to the innocent,
Yes.
a gift of love.
Well, I hope so.
You have other hobbies besides, this is the picture of the quilt of Table Rock,
I
which
know,
is,
that's interesting.
which,
I don't make that fancy a quilt.
okay.
My baby quilts are just 4-patch, 9-patch, or windmill pattern, something simple. Just something colorful and bright that a baby would like.
These were the wildflowers. Are flowers and herbs a part of your Indian heritage that?
Oh, not a lot. I do like to raise a garden, vegetables basically.
Oh.
I know a little bit about some herbs, but not a lot of them. So.
These are just some of my treasures that my father was from Spokane, and his father took pictures. He was a photographer, and unfortunately, during the Depression, someone bought all those plates with the pictures of the Indians in regalia and cleaned them and sold them for window glass.
Oh, how sad.
So we have only 2 of those pictures.
Oh,
I
dear.
just would be so honored to have them all.
Yes.
Unfortunately, at that time, who knew?
I know.
Who knew history was going to be so precious? Give me
I have a hand drum,
oh, you do?
not so big.
Do you play it? Tell me about your earrings. They're just...
Well, this is one of my favorite bear earrings. They're just little dream catchers.
And the story on that is?
It's a pair that my son and daughter-in-law bought and gave to me about, 10 years ago.
You don't dress in
Regalia?
regalia?
I do if I were going to a powwow. But
I've got to find a picture of that. I think that's interesting.
I do have my buckskin dress, and I have my medicine bag that my grandmother gave me. I had the dress made later, but she did give me my medicine bag.
Now, how much like this would it be?
It's similar. Mine has sleeves. Well, my sleeves come down about so. And when I'm standing up, the fringe hits me just below the knees.
I prize my little dolly here. I wish they could just talk and tell me about. You've got any stories about? You mentioned that there was a promise that you would not share your story until then.
That's right.
Secrets kill. Was it hard to keep that story?
No, it really wasn't. She told me not to tell, so I didn't tell. Whatever Grandma said was right.
Was she a matriarch of the family?
Pretty much so.
Tell me a little more about Grandma.
Well, this Grandma, not the great Grandma, but this Grandma, she had 7 children. A couple of them, let's see, 1, 2, 3. One little boy passed away when he was a year old. But her two sons were in World War I and World War II. And my mother was actually the baby of the family.
We've learned that native language was used in World War II.
Well, the code talkers, yes.
And
that was Navajo.
And because?
Because their language could not be deciphered like any other code language.
It's so exciting when you learn stories like that. That we have so much to give you thanks. I mean, medicines, things like that, that you knew as a nation long before Europeans did.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Of course, the earliest Europeans, I'm sure, knew a lot about the herbs and medications they could make from the herbs back then, too. But Native Americans, they did know a lot about the use of herbs.
And buildings.
It's like aspirin is nothing more than willow bark.
So go chew some willow bark.
Right. Boil you up some willow bark. You got the same thing.
I didn't know that. I'm glad I was here at Better Life Television today. You've got a minute left. Share something precious out of your childhood, please.
Oh, my goodness. I have no idea. I had a just interesting life. I traveled a lot from between age of 9 till I was 17. Then I got married, came here, and living here has been great.
Buzzy was a good.
Yes.
Everybody liked.
Oh, yes, he was. And Mary mentioned the fact about the funeral. You don't go to many funerals where they play power saws for music. Mm-hmm.
And that's
had 3 young people that cranked up their power saws.
Oh, wow.
And he would have loved it.
Oh, for a video of that funeral.
The only funeral we had was just graveside.
There in Williams.
And there was about 500 people there.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much for being my guest on Journeys and Journals. And tune in again next week. I'm Bernie Martin Beck saying bye for now.